before it had entirely covered the world. By 1750, the Industrial Revolution was starting, and that just about spread all the way across the world in only hundreds of years instead of thousands of years. And that was pretty much complete, although it hadn't reached the whole world, but it had reached most of the world by 1950. And then during the next doubling, between 1950 and 1960, the Industrial Revolution began to be replaced by what Toffler calls the third wave, which is information civilization, which is what we're living in now. Now in the 1980s, it's getting more and more commonplace to say that we're living in an information technology rather than a power technology. So we've gone from the agricultural revolution, which took millenniums, to the Industrial Revolution, which took centuries, to the information revolution, which is taking place in decades. So there's a definite acceleration in history. If you look back to earlier stages, you find that it took about 30,000 years to get from the appearance of Homo sapiens to the beginning of the Bronze Age in Thailand. And if you look back to our prototypes or progenitors, you find from the first hominid-type creatures in South Africa, the Australopithecines. It took 5 million years to get from the first Australopithecines to Homo sapiens, and it took 30,000 years to get from Homo sapiens to the Bronze Age, and only a couple of thousand years to get from that to the Industrial Revolution, and only a couple of hundred years to get from that to the Information Revolution. Or if you look at it on a bigger scale, it took approximately 4 billion years for evolution to get to the point where we had a Bronze Age and then an Industrial Revolution and now the Computer Revolution. If you put all this on a clock, if you take history on this planet is starting at midnight, and you assume the life of the planet is 15 billion years, which is the estimated life of a G-type star, then it is now 8 o'clock in the morning, and it's time for us to wake up. Because we've pretty much been operating on autopilot up until now. And there are signs of planetary awakening. Domesticated primate psychology remains pretty much the same as it was in the Paleolithic, but one sees increasing evidences of mutations. While civilization has been moving gradually westward, and knowledge has been doubling, there have always been conflicts between the more westernmost part that's rising and the more easterly part, which has reached its peak and is ready to decline. This is the usual pattern of the great wars throughout history. They have been between a rising western power and a declining eastern power. And as a matter of fact, you find this on a mini scale too if you look within American history. The big struggle at the end of the 19th century that involved the western states versus the eastern states was about free coinage of silver. Do they teach anything about that in universities at all these days? The free silver movement was based on the fact that a lot of silver was found in Colorado, and I think some in New Mexico and a few other states around here. And a lot of the Westerners got the idea if we could have free coinage of silver, then we wouldn't have to borrow from the Eastern banks. We could have a silver-based currency, and then we wouldn't be paying such enormous interest. And so there was a big movement for the free coinage of silver, and the Eastern bankers objected to this on the grounds that they wanted to collect the maximum amount of interest. And the only way they could do that is if the currency was based on one metal only, on gold, and they maintained their monopoly on gold. That's how William Jennings Bryan got to make that famous speech, of which everybody, however little they know about 19th century history, they've heard the closing line of it, "You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." You've all heard that? He was referring to the gold standard and the Western desire to have a double standard, including silver. That conflict between the Western and the Eastern United States has accelerated during the 20th century, and it's the subject of Carl Oglesby's book, The Yankee and Cowboy War, which traces the conflict between Western and Eastern interests throughout the 20th century and applies it to some of the mysterious questions of the 20th century, such as the Kennedy assassination, in which, under very mysterious circumstances, a representative of the Eastern banking powers was abruptly replaced by a representative of the Texan oil interests. The ignominious defeat of Richard Nixon after winning the most overwhelming landslide victory in American history until that date in 1972 within a year and a half, Nixon was out of office in disgrace. Oglesby suggests that this was the Yankee revenge. Nixon was very much a cowboy candidate representing specifically California wealth, and the Yankees decided to dump him, so every single crime Nixon committed became public knowledge. There's generally a tacit agreement among the powers that be: if you don't expose me, I won't expose you. But suddenly everybody was eager to leak to the press everything they had on Nixon, and he was pretty thoroughly disgraced and demolished. This Yankee and cowboy war is probably gradually being replaced as the two forces are going to be driven to combine against the rising threat that's coming from Japan once again. The last time the threat came from Japan, it came in military form. Then the Japanese wrote pacifism in their constitution, and now they represent an economic threat. And there is this rising anxiety about Japanese efficiency and technology, and why do they do things so much cheaper and quicker and so on. And in fact, every part of the computer field in which the United States doesn't lead, the Japanese do lead already, and in some parts the Japanese are leading more and more, and it looks like where America is in the lead, the Japanese are catching up. So it seems this west to east thing has gone all the way around the globe in the last 5,000 years since the Bronze Age began. It's not only gone all around the globe, it has more and more feedback incorporated into it. By the time the center of power had moved from Thailand to Rome, most of the knowledge from Rome wasn't getting back to Thailand, let's say, although some of it was getting back to China by way of the Silk Road, which went from Rome to North India and from North India to China, which explains a lot of the similarities between mystical traditions in China and Gnosticism in Rome. They were both being passed back and forth through northern India. But a lot of the Roman knowledge wasn't getting back to Thailand, and by the time of the rise of the great Italian city-states around 1500, the Renaissance, that knowledge was not getting back as far as the Near East even. But as this process has accelerated, the more knowledge that's accumulated in one place, the faster it gets around the whole world. Like TV, when I started high school, there were no TV sets outside of laboratories. By the time I graduated from high school, you couldn't look over any American city without seeing a sea of TV aerials. A whole revolution had occurred in just 4 years. Something similar has been happening with computers in this decade, and they've spread across the whole country with tremendous rapidity. But meanwhile, knowledge, wherever it's discovered, is traveling over the whole world faster and faster. So the movement of knowledge and power from east to west over the last several thousand years has now become an oscillation in which the knowledge is circling the globe faster